Hello mga kababayan, ito po ulit si Kaloy Conde. Welcome tayo dito sa unang episode ng Harapan, itong bagong show ng Facts Matters PH. Don't confuse this with Facts First ni Christian Isguera. Mas sikat yon at mas gwapo yon. Kasama natin today para pag-usapan ng International Human Rights Day on Tuesday. Ito yung kumbaga pag-usapan natin kung ano na ba ang sitwasyon ng human rights sa Pilipinas mula nung nanungkulan si Presidente Bongbong Marcos Jr. Kasi nga siyempre may mga nagsasabi na medyo bumuti na, may mga nagsasabi din naman na medyo hindi. May kailangan pang mga gawin. So yan ang pag-uusapan natin at kasama natin ngayon ang tatlong batikang human rights activist, defenders na mga kaibigan natin. Kasama dito si former CHR Commissioner Karen Gomez Dumpit. Hello, Ma'am Karen.
Hello,
Uh,
good morning.
at
Happy
kasama
Sunday.
Happy Sunday indeed. At kasama din natin si Rose Trajano, siya ang Secretary General ng IDEFEN. Ito yung In Defense of Human Rights and Accountability. Sorry Rose, nakalimutan ko na. Ang haba kasi ng ano nyo eh.
Ako mag-explain.
Okay.
Ah,
Ah,
magandang umaga po, tsaka sorry, pagko-correct. National Coordinator po, hindi Secretary
oh,
General.
sorry.
Ah,
Lagi ako nagkakamali dyan. Sige, ayusin natin yan.
ng
National
in,
Coordinator ng IDEFEN.
in
At
Defense of Human Rights and Dignity Movement. Magandang
yes.
umaga sa lahat.
At ito naman po kasama natin ngayon ang ating suki na rin si Tinay Palabay. Siya po ang Secretary General ng Karapatan Human Rights Alliance. Magandang umaga Tinay at welcome.
Magandang maganda at palabang araw sa ating lahat.
Yes, palaban indeed, palaban no. Now, mga kaibigan, this is going to be a very interesting discussion. Although sa amin medyo nabobore na kami sa discussion na to sa totoo lang among rights defenders because we tend to repeat ourselves. Pero for the benefit of the public, I think it's a discussion that's worth joining in, lalo na Human Rights Day nga sa Tuesday. So, isa-isahin natin ano, tanungin natin si Tinay, si Rose, tsaka si Karen kung ano yung parang magbigay sa ng konting overview about the human rights situation sa Pilipinas mula nung nanungkulan si BBM at kung gusto nila pati na rin doon sa mga nakaraang mga administrasyon at ang mga issues doon. Simulan natin kay Karen. Karen, ano sa tingin nyo ang nangyari nitong nakaraang mahigit 2 taon under kay BBM? Tingin nyo ba gumanda ang human rights situation natin?
Well, definitely yes, because there's nowhere to go but up, di ba? Masyadong nababa ang pag-implementa o pagrespeto sa karapatang pantao ng past administration. Ngayon, at least may decorum na ang ating gobyerno at hindi naman natin masasabing super ganda ng human rights situation kasi marami pa rin tayong problema. In fact, the war on drugs are still continuing, although the scale and pace has really waned a lot, no? But that's one thing that we need to do. Accountability for past violations. We've always said that that is a continuing obligation. Hindi pwedeng sabihin ng bagong gobyerno na, ay, yun yung dati, ngayon iba na. We will move forward. We will move on from that, not move forward, but we will move on from that. Yung amin na lang ang titingnan namin, yung mga fresh violations. No? That's one. One thing good also is that we know that finally the Philippine Human Rights Action Plan will be implemented or will be launched. No? And this is one thing that's very good for us because it gives government a plan or let's say guidance on how they can implement human rights better. I'm going to stop there. But just to say that yes, it's better, but it's not without problems that have been lingering. There's still impunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. A few things to unpack there, which we will definitely do maya-maya. Rose, sa pananaw ng IDEFEN ng mga colleagues mo, what are the key issues na tingin nyo ay nag-improve under BBM and do you think these are going to be sustainable? Your assessment, please.
Siyempre siguro ang pinakamatindi, katulad na banggit ni Karen, yung pagbaba ng extrajudicial killings. Pero again, no, meron pa rin mahigit 800 tao pa din ang napatay sa pag-uumpisa pa lang nung panahon ni Marcos hanggang ngayon. At tuloy-tuloy pa yan, ano? Posibleng bumaba yung matinding civil and political rights violations, pero ang tingin natin ngayon, ang major na usapin natin ay yung mga economic, social, and cultural rights at social justice issues, no? Matindi rin yung, at tumitingkad pa ngayon, yung usapin ng, meron pa tayong good governance? Rights-based ba yung ating governance? Grabe, sa nangyayari, nakikita natin at hearing sa Quadcom at good governance, matindi yung itsura na gusto mong bigyan ng accountability yung isang tao, ang vice presidente, pero pinipigilan ng presidente. Kaloka, di ba? At syempre, kahit na nga bumaba ang civil and political rights, yung mga atake sa HRDs, mga naging biktima ng EJK, wala pa rin tayo, unfortunately, ng accountability at justisya. So yan pa rin ang major issues na pinapanindigan po ng IDFM at ipaglalaban.
Salamat na marami, Rose. Rose Trajano po ng iDefend. Tinay, ikaw naman, ano ang dark spots, bright spots, or whatever spots na nakikita nyo sa administrasyon ni BBM pagdating sa human rights?
Well, gagamitin ko yung mga salita nung dating spokesperson, ex-human rights lawyer. No? I think yung sitwasyon natin ngayon, ayoko sabihin yung pangalan niya kasi baka sumikat pa. Nasa UAE na Pero tingin ko, our situation right now is a classic case ng mamamayan laban sa kasamaan at kadiliman. Kasi yung nakaraang administrasyon, matindi yung sinaklot na kadiliman sa atin. At the same time, nandyan pa rin talaga yung kasamaan because the root causes of where human rights violations come from, yung kahirapan, yung iba't ibang social ills, naririyan pa rin at hindi talaga, I can't see, despite mga executive orders, even with the Human Rights Action Plan, I don't see any substantial improvement doon sa sitwasyon. Kahit yung Quadcom hearings, of course, meron tayong nakikitang pagtutuloy ng pagtugis sa katotohanan at pananagutan. Pero at the same time, at the end of the day, and today is December 8, no, I don't know what will happen on December 10, pero ang reality ay wala pa ring napapanagot. No? And sa tingin ko, habang ganun yung sitwasyon, umuulit lang yung mga paglabag na ito, yung mga pamamaslang, yung mga illegal na aresto, yung pambobomba sa mga communities. So, medyo formidable yung dalawang yon, yung kadiliman at kasamaan. No? Pero at the same time, ang bright spot, I think, is that we continue to work towards yung totoong mga naisin natin para sa katarungan at karapatan.
Well, thank you, Tinay. Those are really interesting points you raised, no? Ang sa akin naman, tingin ko ay mukhang may effort ang gobyernong to make it seem like it's complying with its commitments. Some of it, I mean, not all of it, despite all the problems nga na in-enumerate nyo na andyan. At the very least ngayon, again, sabi nga ni Kong Karin kanina, because the Duterte administration set the bar so low, negative zero tayo pagdating sa human rights kay Duterte. Parang ang nangyayari ngayon, kahit na walang gawing malaki or kahit man lang maliit si Mr. Marcos, gawin lang niya parang steady yung sitwasyon, lalabas pa rin siyang maayos. Parang ganun yung nangyayari, ano. Pero obviously, that doesn't answer yung mga lingering at very, very serious issues on human rights in the Philippines. And one of these, nabanggit nyo na, yung accountability nga. Kasi yun ang laging dinidiin natin, di ba? Okay, mas konti ang namamatay sa drug war, mas naging openly engaged ang gobyernong ito with civil society and human rights defenders, but there are lingering issues na hindi na-address. At ito nga yung pinakamatindi dito, nabanggit ninyo, yung accountability. Tingin nyo, I mean, in practical and realistic manner, and please, we're past the point now of intro, so please butt in. Magdebatehan tayo dito if you want. In very practical terms, tingin nyo ano ang pwedeng gawin ng gobyerno nito para at least man lang makausad yung mga ibang kahit maliliit na programa para ma-improve yung situation on civil and political rights, economic and social justice, yung mga ganon. Tingin nyo, Karen, let's
Well,
start with you.
Ako, unang-unang pumasok sa isip ko, alam mo kung ano? Cooperate with the ICC.
Okay.
The Quadcom hearings are very much welcome, actually. It's very much welcome. But at the end of the day, kaya ba ng ating sistema na parusahan ang mga nagkasala when we know that they're the highest authorities of the land prior to this administration? Hindi eh.
Yeah.
Tapos hindi mo rin hawak ang korte, di ba? In a way, hindi mo hawak. Delays are there, yung influence niyan. You're still looking at a Supreme Court that when President Duterte left, 13 of its 15 members are his appointees.
Yeah.
Yung pang mga natira dyan, majority pa yan, I'm sure. Hindi ko pa nababalikan. So that's one. I think ICC, because they will take charge of taking or exacting accountability from those who are most guilty and the ones who are the highest. Ngayon, magandang tingnan din yung accountability domestically. Kasi yan din yung ating titingnan. Kasapi po ako sa isang movement na ang tinatawag ay Duterte Panagutin. No?
Yes.
Si Tinay kasama dyan. At nangangalap kami ng iba pang mga taga-suporta or initiators to ensure that not only domestically, pero yung ICC makita rin natin yung cooperation sa ICC. So I think that's one good move that this government can actually make so that we can exact accountability from the most guilty.
Yeah. Tinay, Rose?
Siguro, mauna ko, Tinay, ilang beses na naming binabanggit sa Department of Justice. No? Kasi napaka, disappointing at frustrating. Di ba yung mga na-convict sa EJK, panahon actually ni Duterte yan.
Mm-hmm.
Panahon yata ni Bongbong, wala pang na-convict or nasampahan ng kaso. Yung 52 na inimbestigahan daw ng NBI, wala pa rin nangyayari. Hindi ba? Sa panahon ni Secretary Guevara pa yon, no? Tapos ngayon, nagtayo na naman sila ng bagong task force, ang DOJ, para daw bantayan yung mga complaints doon sa Quadcom, no?
Yeah.
Pero hindi rin natin alam may mangyayari nga ba talaga dito. Ang palagi namin hinihiling sa DOJ, goodwill man lamang po. Pwede bang unahin nyo at least ang investigation doon sa mga nasangkot ang mga bata sa pagpatay? Diba? Mga around 220 lang yan. Alam natin, hindi naman nagdodroga yung mga bata na yan. So, as a matter of goodwill at pakitang gilas or sincerity nila, umpisahan nyo ho sa mga bata. Pero hanggat walang nangyayaring kahit isang ganong mga domestic mechanism, ang hirap tanggapin na meron tayong chance talaga for domestic accountability. Hindi tayo titigil, syempre, sa pag-hope, no? Siguro isa pa, gaano kalinaw ba yung Philippine Human Rights Action Plan? Kasi sa Tuesday pa lang siya ilo-launch, no? Wala pang nakakita sa draft. Actually, nag-request ako ng pwede bang makahingi ng advance copy? Sabi, wala pa po nasa mga departments pa po. So,
saan galing pala, Rose? Saan galing dapat?
In-expect natin ng PHRC will consolidate everything. Pero ang sabi ng PHRC, naku, wala pa po nasa mga departments pa po. Aba, paano natin makikita ng buo? Ang isang programa na ilo-launch na sa Tuesday at magkakapag-komentaryo tayo, gaano ito talaga makakapag-respond doon sa mga panawagan natin sa usapin ng karapatang pantao.
Nako.
May pag-asa siya, pero hanggat hindi kompleto, no, at talagang substantial yung participation natin dito sa PIRAP, Philippine Human Rights Action Plan, at hindi yan natatranslate sa Tagalog, sa Pilipino, para mabantayan ng lahat ng mga Pinoy, mahirap nating asahan hanggat di natin nakikita kung paano yung implementation. Yan muna siguro.
Bago kay Tinay, ilinawin ko lang, ang PHRC po ay ito yung Presidential Committee on Human Rights. Iba po ito sa Commission on Human Rights. Itong
Yes.
Presidential Committee ay under po ito sa Office of the President, if I'm not mistaken. At ito po ay
Yes.
sila itong mga naglalabi ng mga posisyon ng gobyerno about human rights. At sila nga itong lead, I think, agency dito sa Philippine Human Rights Action Plan. At himayin din natin yan mamaya. Pero Tinay, your take on that, on what was said.
Dadagdagan ko lang yung sinabi ni Rose at saka ni Com Karen. Kailangan siguro at since day one, ito yung sinasabi at ng mamamayan. Arestuhin ni Bongbong si Duterte. Pa-aresto niya. Kasi tama yun one act, that act can send a big message, that presidents are not immune from...
Mag-ama ha, Tinay, mag-ama ang ipa-aresto, hindi lang yung isa.
Sige. Dagdag natin. Duterte's panagutin na, may S. kasi 'di ba? Malaki ang mensahe na 'yon dahil tungkol 'yon sa pananagutan, tungkol 'yon sa sistema natin. If it is done na 'yon ang mensahe at tungkol 'yon sa maraming kailangang dapat ayusin sa sistemang panghustisya natin. No? Siyempre marami pang sumunod diyan. Nag-agree din ako kay Com Karen doon sa sinabi niya na may significant naman na hakbang yung in the scheme of things, merong halaga yung Quad Committee hearings. Ang isang halaga nito, I think is sa December 11, magkakaroon ng pagdinig tungkol dun sa tinatawag nilang EJK bill, no? Anti-EJK bill.
Ito ba yung Kian bill?
Yes.
I think this is a different one.
Okay.
Authored by the chairpersons of the Quad Committee.
Okay.
So ito ay it's I think it's not the first defining extrajudicial killings bilang isang heinous crime, pero laman niya 'yon, no? At mahalaga na merong short term, may medium term at may long term tayong tanaw, at yung anti-EJK bill na to ang isa sa mga paraan, no, para mapanagot yung mga nasa gobyerno, na yung mga state actors, yung sinasabi nila Chair Chito noon at saka ni Com Karen, no, na mga human rights violators, lalo na yung mga state actors who perpetuate that kind of crimes, those kinds of crimes sa atin.
Well, that's interesting, kasi at least itong Quadcom, ginagampanan nila yung mandate nila to hold these hearings and file laws in aid of legislation nga kasi, di ba? So hopefully nga everybody's hoping na itong kalalabasan ng hearing na to ay makapagpasa talaga ng batas para mas lalo pang mapalakas yung mga human rights laws natin sa Pilipinas, no? Although of course the other side of that, and I don't know, I'm sure you will agree with me on this one, ang ganda-ganda ng mga batas natin on human rights, pero almost always ang enforcement ang problema. Pero about the Quadcom hearings, magandang binanggit niyo about that, pero meron kasing parang lumalabas na image na parang in terms of accountability, pinapalabas minsan na ito na yon. Kaya natin hindi kailangan ng ICC, kaya hindi natin kailangan ng iba kasi ito ginagawa na ng gobyerno yung dapat nilang gawin. Obviously, hindi totoo yun. Hindi tama yun kasi unang-una, hindi naman husgado yung Quadcom. Hindi naman hindi naman korte yan at hindi naman yan wala namang kumbaga hindi naman pwedeng tawag ito mag-impose ng penalties or incarcerate or detain those who they found guilty kumbaga. So anong tingin nyo dito? I mean, given the limitation ng Quadcom, but at the same time, acknowledging that meron siyang mga nagagawang maganda din naman, saan, at hindi pa tayo tapos, right? Tuloy-tuloy pa. Saan dapat pumunta pa itong Quadcom hearings? Kumbaga, tipong, okay, maximize na natin, pero ano pang dapat nilang gawin?
Oh, tama yon ano. Kasi ang investigation naman ng Congress is really investigation in aid of legislation. And I'm glad that Kian Bill, the EJK Bill, is being crafted right now. And nabigyang pansin yan. Pero sana, aside from that, pati yung HRD or Human Rights Defender
Yes.
Bill, isama na nila dyan.
Anti-discrimination bill.
Gumawa sila ng I think the Philippine National Human Rights Action Plan will be containing a set of legislative agenda for that. So that's one. Second, I think hindi naman natin pwedeng sabihin and i-dismiss yung efforts ng Quadcom kasi napakarami ng nakuha nilang information. And sabi nga ni Chair Eta Rosales dati, pagka ganyan, maganda ang confrontation, maganda yung ganyang mga venues kasi pag sumingaw na, at least alam na ng publiko na may ibang version ng nangyari na sa kanila mismo na nanggaling. Hindi na sa atin, ng mga human rights defender. Sa kanila na in their mouths mismo, you will find or you will know what happened, including the incentives that we've been always saying from the start. They have been inciting murder, killings. They have been incentivizing killing. Nandun eh. Sinabi na ng tao nila mismo. Now, what's the use of that aside from lawmaking? Of course, sabi mo nga, hindi naman yan pwedeng magsentensya kasi hindi naman yan korte. So maganda rin na may sumalo na ang executive to be able to use that as pieces of evidence. But that's also very good for the ICC because remember, all those testimonies are done in oath.
Yes.
Diba? And then you can also see again the decorum of the former president in these hearings. And it just goes to show na talagang hindi kakayanin kung dito lang sa atin. Kailangan natin ng tulong. Hindi natin sinasabi ng ICC will replace the justice system here in the country because we know that it just complements.
Mm-hmm.
So yun ang sagot ko dyan sa tanong na wag natin maliitin kung ano yung value ng Quadcom. Nagpapasalamat tayo doon. Pero again, it's supposed to be a continuing thing. It should feed into legislative agenda. It should feed into the investigation agenda of our law enforcement. And then it should feed into cooperation, international cooperation for wrongdoing, for grave human rights violations, for crimes against humanity.
Rose, Tinay? Any additional thoughts on that?
Mauna ako, Tinay. Ano ba to? Siyempre, yung continuing telenovela ng Quadcom, idagdag pa yung good governance and public accountability. Di ba? Saya-saya natin mga Pinoy na mahilig tayo sa Korean drama. Ito, congressional drama, political drama natin, no? At parang minsan na-amaze ako. Alam na namin yan eh. Noong panahon ni Duterte, alam na natin yan eh, di ba? Yung mga issue na yan, yung pagkakasangkot nila talaga sa drug cartel, yung mga reward money, yung mga assassins, alam na natin yan. Pero ngayong lumalabas at naririnig mo yung detalye, nagugulat ka pa din. Di ba?
Exactly. Natutrauma ka pa nga eh.
Trauma pa rin tayo.
Pabalik ang trauma mo eh.
Oo. Pero totoo naman talaga na kung ang in aid of legislation, yung purpose niya, di ba? napakadami na talagang makukuhang legislation diyan. So nag-umpisa na nga sa EJK. Lalo na din yung usapin ng pag-audit sa confidential at intelligence funds.
Yes.
Diba? Kailangan ba talaga yung mga non-military or non-security agencies meron doon?
But in lang, Rosa, just to add to that, hindi pa nga napag-uusapan kung ano ang ginawang papel ng intelligence funds na yan sa red tagging and all of that.
Oo. Ang nakaka sa akin, ang sama-sama ng loob ko, mabigat ang loob ko noon. Sabi ko, nung naghihiring na sila, sabi ko, nakakalungkot, nakakainis kayo. Nung panahon ni Duterte, you were all silent. Siguro terrorized tayo lahat, hindi ba? Pero ngayon naglalabasan kayo at ang titindi niyong bumanat. Totoo ba yan? Seryoso ba yan? O politika lang talaga yan? May mangyayari ba after all those results or all those findings? May mangyayari ba talaga? Yun ang dapat nating bantayan kasi yun yung dapat nating singilin sa ating mga politiko, mga legislators na natiling essentially kasangkot ng matinding violations ng panahon ni Duterte na ngayon lang lumalabas. So politics lang ba ito o talagang nagbabagong isip at nagbabago na ang ihip ng hangin? Harinawa.
Subukan natin sagutin yan mamaya, Rose, ano? Pero Tinay.
Politika lang. Bigla.
Ayan, sinagot na niya.
Sa tingin ko. Pero, may pero pa rin, syempre. Hindi, nakikita ko kasi yung mga nanay nung mga biktima doon sa gera kontra droga. Alam mo, naka 12, 13 Quadcom hearings na and they're there since the morning hanggang madaling araw. Tapos, at the same time, may mga pinaslang noong kay President Duterte nung remen niya dun sa Bloody Sunday Massacre. Actually, nanggaling yung mga bagay na yan dun sa Quadcom hearings
Yes.
din. No? Tapos may tinitingnan kami na, for example, si General Sinas at saka si Colonel Lito Patay na mga implementors ng drug war. Parang hindi pa nagigrill masyado.
Yeah.
No? Kasi, ewan ko, marami yata silang, malakas yata sila. Pero sana i-grill pa kasi sa totoo lang, tingin ko marami pa. Marami
Yeah.
pang baho. No? At yung, kumbaga may blood trail, may money trail. Tama si Rose. Yung confidential and intelligence funds ay pondo na dapat tinitignan kasi hindi lang naman to yung mga kampanya ng gobyerno dati at ngayon na ginagawa nila dahil someone said so, 'di ba? May rhyme and reason 'yan At ang isang reason na nagawa nila 'yan ay pera at pera ng taong bayan. So kailangan baka naman Quadcom, no? Bilisan, palalimin pa ninyo yung mga pagdinig na ito. Kasama nyo naman kami, alas 11 ng gabi.
Alas 2 pa nga minsan.
Alas 11 ng gabi, 3 million pa rin nanonood sa live. So, para sa amin, mahalaga na ma-unearth pa to, no, para hindi lang para doon sa ICC, no, pero para sa taong bayan, no, at magkaroon nga ng listahan ng reforms na pwedeng maganap pagkatapos nito. Isa na doon yung pag-abolish ng confidential and intelligence funds, which we think is being used. Katulad nga ng sinabi ni Senator Laila de Lima, where can they get the money? Diba? Where can they get the resources aside from being in power para magbigay ng rewards sa maraming tao para pumatay.
Yeah.
So, marami pa nga na-answered sa mga Quad Committee hearings. Of course, there were some, humarap na si Pangulo, Duterte, binola lang naman yata tayo nung araw na yon. Pero, kumbaga marami pang trabaho na pwedeng gawin yung Quadcom. And its consequences, of course, should happen, no, sa judiciary, di lang sa loob ng kamara, sa judiciary, sa executive branches natin at sa pandaigdigang human rights community.
Those are excellent points, Tinay, no? And Rose, of course, kung Karen, ano. Ang isang, kumbaga, tingin ko rin dito, itong Quadcom hearings ito, this is unprecedented kasi it affords the public a chance to really learn about the human rights situation in the Philippines and how human rights is, kung paano vina-violate in very serious manner across the Philippines, no? So I just hope na yung Quadcom will take these hearings as an opportunity para palalimin pa yung educate sa public about basic rights. I think that's one thing. Although ginagawa naman natin yan, no, every chance we are given every time we're given the chance to speak at the hearings, yun naman natin yung sinasabi, no? Pero yun nga. Gusto ko lang balikan konti yung point about how the Quadcom is being conducted. I get the point na all of this is driven by politics. And in fact, on my personal capacity, I have really raised this issue na kumbaga kung hindi naman nawala si Duterte at hindi naging presidente si Marcos, hindi naman mangyayari to. I mean, I guess my point is we should manage our expectations sa Quadcom. Given all of this, regardless of the seemingly good things na nangyayari. But at the same time, this is a golden opportunity as well for rights defenders, for advocates to really not just support the Quadcom but find ways para kung paano pa nila magawa yung trabaho nila at palalimin. And keeping in mind the fact that most of these people who are asking questions ngayon ay mga politicians, regardless of kanilang mga protestations na we're not doing the bidding of the government, that we are here to support human rights. Of course, the record in the past will belie that. Pero paano yung natin doon? Paano yung attack natin doon sa kanila? Paano natin sila, kumbaga, how do we put them in a position na panindigan nila ito, na hindi tipong after 2028 elections, magbabago na uli yung paningin nila?
Hindi lang 2028 elections, 2020, ano na ba ngayon? 2025 elections.
Next year, yeah.
Diba? Kasi makikita din natin yan Pagdating ng Pebrero, meron
Yes.
pa ba?
Yeah.
Meron pa ba? Yun
So anong gagawin nga?
That's one. And that's, every election should be a recalibration for the electorate.
Yes.
Matuto na tayo kasi tayong hindi natututo as an electorate. I'm not talking about, of course, I don't want to sound so pontifical about it, diba? Kasi hindi naman yun yung dun Ang issue dyan, dapat talaga may tamang values orientation or pagkilala sa ating values ang ating mga mamboboto. And I'm not talking about those who voted for President Duterte before. It's the collective. Paano natin titingnan yung kabuuan ng electorate on how to elect people who we deserve. Diba? Kasi sometimes it's also already a reflection of who we are. When we vote for somebody, and I'm not talking about, it's the whole thing, collective. Ganyan na ba tayo? Kaya nga nung kay President Duterte, di ba, nung na-elect siya, parang ang laki ng tsunami bumagsak sa ganito ba tayo? Ganito ba tayo? Do we always ask people to be killed? Is the Filipino culture a killing culture? Are we like this? That's the question that entered my mind. In this case naman, nung nanalo si President Marcos, alam naman natin yun, there was collective depression among the human rights community. Diba?
Mm-hmm.
But here you are, coming from a president who was elected by plurality, that's Duterte, about 38-39%, if I'm not mistaken, you now have a near 60%, if I'm not mistaken, for this president. We have to wake up. Diba? We have to wake up because we have to take a look at why. Why? Bakit ganon? Tapos sasabihin na naman natin, Pilipinas ang hirap mong mahalin. Pilipinas ang dali mong makalimot, etc. Pero for me, we had to move on from that depression to just take a look at how the electorate is, how do we vote as a people, and then try to work on whatever we have. Right now, we have a President Marcos. Can we wish that away? We cannot. So that's why we have to engage in the same manner that come these midterm elections, we have to wake up and ask them the hard questions.
Yeah.
Ask them and vote as if that person is us. What do we need to do? Yun ang akin ha. Kasi hindi naman, of course, I have my preference. At the end of the day, I will have to respect each other's vote, no? Another person's vote. Although I don't agree with it, but once the results of the elections are in and it's official, we need to engage. That's my take on it. Kaya dapat maningil talaga tayo dun sa taong nakaupo.
I guess the challenge is, and feel free to butt in, Tina and Rose, the challenge is to really how to, using the Quadcom hearings, for instance, but how do we make the ordinary Filipino appreciate human rights as a value during elections? Rose, Tina, you might have some thoughts about, the earlier question of how do we influence the Quadcom legislators to really maximize this and para talagang tuloy-tuloy nilang gawin ito?
Dapat mangialam tayo. As in, diretsohin natin si Congressman Ace Barbers, sila Congressman Paduano, sila Kong Benny Abante, yung mga chairpersons ng Quadcom, at kahit si Speaker Martin Romualdez, no? Na may gusto kaming sabihin, may gusto kaming malaman diyan. So, maganda online at kahit yung snail mail ma-engage na mapanawagan natin sa taong bayan na meron kayong dapat sinasabi diyan, no? And the barrage of letters, of course, ay mahalaga. Pangalawa, I think sa gitna ng telenovela na napapanood ng taong bayan, mahalaga. Uso rin lang naman ngayon yung mga vloggers, 'di ba? Yung mga vloggers nagbibigay ng reaction videos. So,
sometimes real time, ha?
Oo, kaya actually ang isang pinapanawagan namin, pag may mga Quadcom hearings, nandiyan lang din naman yung mga tao na napapanood nila, bakit hindi mag-set up ng Quadcom hearings with yung yung may real-time reaction, no? Yung nandoon sa mga komunidad, sa mga eskwelahan, no? As in, tulad dati nung panahon namin ni Kaloy, wow, pero mas matanda ng konti si Kaloy, nung impeachment ni dating Presidente Erap Estrada, ano yun real time.
Yeah, I remember.
Napalabas yung impeachment proceedings para makita ng taong bayan. Hindi pa uso internet noon. At nagko-komento kami, no? Nag-enjoy ng comments at reaction wala dun sa taong bayan. In short, we have to do something, no? Tayo na mga human rights defenders and advocates at hindi lang yung mga kongresista sa loob yung bahagi ng show na yan.
Yes.
Kailangan may marinig mula sa atin at kailangan makita ng taong bayan paano sila magpa-participate. Kasi kung wala yon, may iwan lang talaga sa protagonist versus the antagonist.
Saka yung narrative medyo magiging limitado, right?
Oo, lalo na syempre sa loob ng Quadcom, for example, may iba silang diskurso tungkol sa mga tao na gumagamit ng drugs, no?
Yeah.
Hindi lahat ng yon masasamang tao. When in fact, hindi na pag-uusapan yung bakit nga ba merong mga tao na gumagamit, people who use drugs, 'di ba? Ano yung mga social roots of the problem, ano yung mga problema natin sa public health system natin sa ganitong landscape. So talagang kailangan malaki yung papel natin para palalimin yung mga usapin at makapagbigay ng human rights perspective lalo na sa taong bayan.
Kailangan nga talaga ng almost instantaneous or real-time fact-checking or contextualizing dun sa nangyari sa hearing. Kasi I remember, halimbawa, I think this was in the Senate hearing, yung nag-testify si Randy De Los Santos at si Bato na yung nagko-question sa kanya. Ni-raise ni Bato kung paanong nasuspetsahan yung kapatid ni Randy, yung tatay ni Kian, na drug suspect na gumagamit ng droga just on the mere basis ng kanyang appearance. Bungal daw, ganun yung itsura. Napaka sama ng stereotype dun sa mama na para bang lahat ng walang ngipin drugista na. Parang yung ganun eh. Oo. So talagang merong kailangang mas ano pa mas kung paano yung mga human rights defenders ay mag-weigh in dun sa mga nangyayari in real time sa Congress at sa Senate. Rose, yes.
Agree ako nun sa mga sinabi ni Tina, Talagang kahit ako naloloka ako sa dami ng mga vloggers, di ba? So, syempre, talaga naman kahit
Dinagdagan ko pa.
Oo. Alam mong walang katorya-torya yung sinasabi nila. Kasi alam mo, partisan din sila at hindi neutral yung pagtingin. Pero nandyan sila, no? Nakaka-influence sila ng kanilang mga kampo at indirectly or directly, nagbibigay sila ng information, no? Mukhang yun ang kailangan talaga nating palakasin among us sa mga HRDs, no? Pero sa tingin ko mukhang kailangan nating i-target yung mga newbies ba sa Kongreso, yung mga bago, ang tawag nila, young guns ba ang tawag nila? Kasi baka may pag-asa pa tayo sa kanila. Diba? Yan yung mga humaharap karaniwan sa press conference nila na mga bago at may pag-asa pa tayong masway sila or makita talaga nila yung tunay na konsepto at prinsipyo ng karapatang pantao. No? Baka yan ang ating subukang kumbinsihin. No? Na ganito po sana, ipagpatuloy niyo po sana yan. Pero syempre, we cannot deny na ang problema natin ay yung political system natin. No? Yung patronage politics, yung dynasty. Diba?
Produkto rin sila yung magagaling, yung iba dyan, political families. Kaya, pero may pag-asa yun.
So, sinasabi nga ni Karen, paano natin kukontrahin yun? Paano yung electoral education natin? Sabi ko nga pala, ko sinasabi, dati fan ako ni Vilma Santos. Ngayon, hindi na. Nairita ako, pamilya niya ay tatakbo na. Sabi nga nung isang nakita ko lang sa bakit pa naiwan nila yung aso nila, sana pinatakbo na rin.
Si Tina dapat pinatakbo rin. I'm still a Vilmanian despite that. I think that but
pero
I love
pero speaking of showbiz, naalala ko nga, tama yung sinabi mo, yung mga young guns. Pag every time nga na lumalabas sa TV yung, nakalimutan yung pangalan, bata pa, tawag namin sa kanya si Paolo Contis. Si kamukha niya si Paolo Contis. Sino to?
Rodriguez. Si pangalan niya, no? Yung sa motorcycle, si Rodriguez.
Si Juan Ryder, sabi ko. Pero yeah, but you're right, no? Levity aside, these guys are really kind of demonstrating na kung if they do it right, merong mga lumalabas ng mga ganda from there. Tapos kahit na nga yung isa pang sa Batangas ba yan, hindi yung babae. Yung isa, yung congressman din na rin, JJ something. Sorry, medyo pasensya na po, Congressman JJ, di ko nasusundan yung mga pangalan nyo, pero yeah. So the point is this, merong mga magaganda, may mga bata, and in fact, parang I'd like to think na because of what's happening, may mga congressman na medyo mga thunders na ng konti, na hopefully ay pumipino yung mga posisyon nila on human rights. Like si Congressman Benny Abante, the chairman of the Committee on Human Rights. Dati naman wala akong believe dyan kasi I find him bigoted, may mga statements siya minsan na talagang, ano ba yan? Bakit chairman ng Committee on Human Rights ito? Tapos ganito ang sinasabi. Pero in fact, kahit nga dito sa Quadcom, minsan may lumalabas siyang mga hindi swak sa sa konsepto ng human rights. Pero, well, that's the other thing. But the other thing is that at least ito ngayon, lumalabas siya and then he's putting himself on the record na ito yung gusto niyang mangyari. At alam mo yun, napapublicize yung kanyang mga posisyon on certain things like human rights. And I think that is good, right?
Yeah, I just want to kasi na-touch ang showbiz, no. This is one thing perhaps that we can advise media. And you were a journalist and you still are, I think, Kaloy, no? One of the things siguro that we can take a look at is the example of Korea. I'm sorry, ha? I'm a K-drama fan here. Maraming nadidismaya ngayon na mga K-drama fans dahil hindi nila pinalabas, nag-postpone sila ng mga K-dramas nila na ipapalabas sa mainstream media. And the reason for this is because they wanted to cover the protests against the president, President Yu, no? And
Mhm.
that's so fantastic kasi sabi nga nila ang Korea daw may protest culture. Although in the
Oh
end
yeah.
na ano sila no, nabigo dun sa calls for impeachment ng presidente nila, pero at the end of the day, what did media do? And this is a capitalist media, ha, na hindi nila in-air yung kanilang mga K-drama na talagang patok na patok. That's when the phone rings.
Yeah.
But galit na galit yung mga fans kasi na-postpone, so I have to wait another week for the next episode. Forced sila to watch all those protests, to watch all these and that's mainstream media.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
need to have that kind of discipline perhaps so that we can make our general public, the Filipino public, more aware of it. Katulad nga nung sinabi ni Tina sa YouTube, 3 million
Yes.
live ang nanonood. Wow, that's
11
fantastic.
p.m. 11 p.m.
11
yun.
p.m. na.
And you know for a Nielsen rating, kung drama yan, my gosh, that's top 1, di ba? And this is real life. So
Yes.
this is something that we need to do, and I'm a big fan of civic education, just to and it can influence a lot. Remember, I think it was ang probinsyano na nag-react ang Duterte government because there was a scene about torture and
Yeah.
all that. Doon lang ba sila magre-react? Hindi, di ba?
Oy, Kung Karen,
Yeah.
hindi si Duterte ang nag-react doon, si Max de Mesa ang nag-react.
Si Max ba?
Oo, dahil doon sa parang encouragement sa torture diyan sa probinsya.
Okay. So mali pala yon, pero hindi, sinabihan din sila yata na ganon, no? But the thing is, there's a lot of role that media has to play. And it's not just mainstream media, but it's also actors. It's also storytellers, screenwriters who can
Celebrities, yeah.
use civic education in our public. So yun lang, I just wanted to add that kasi I'm a big fan of civic education, no? And it doesn't have to be hard sell. It
Yeah.
can be through drama or
That-
through our TV shows also.
That's let me shift just a little bit as we wind this down. Yung papel ng international community in all of this, apart from itong nangyayari dito sa Quadcom hearings. Yung international community kasi ever since Duterte, laki-laki na nang naging profile nila in terms of their engagement dito sa Pilipinas. The question now to me is, are we getting enough from the international community in terms of making sure that accountability happens, all these investigations take place, and that mapanagot talaga yung dapat mapanagot dito sa mga serious human rights violations na to? Let me start with Tinay.
Sa akin ka nagsimula.
Nega yan, nega.
Tingin ko nagplateau
Okay.
yung ginagawa, no? I understand na may kailangang konsiderasyon dahil bago yung administrasyon, hindi naman to katulad nung dati. Pero that very leverage should have been used by the diplomatic community at saka of course the UN will say that it's doing all it can, yung kaya nito, no? The ICC, well, let's wait and see, no, how well these developments are leveraged, no, dahil ang ano lang naman, hinihintay lahat ng taong bayan kailan i-issue ng ICC yung warrant of arrest.
Mhm.
Diba? Pero yung yung mga foreign governments tila hindi nagamit o nagagamit yung meron sila para magtulak talaga kasi may opportunities maraming opportunities.
Baka napagod kay Digong.
malamang hindi. Maramang may mga ibang konsiderasyon. Pero whatever those considerations are, kailangan may consistency ang
Yeah.
policy nila, lalo na kung tungkol sa human rights.
Yeah.
So marami yan tungkol yung sa EU, of course, yung iba't ibang mga gobyerno within the EU member states na kakampi natin, no, dun sa pagsusulong nung sa Human Rights Council and in many venues. Kasi at the end of the day, kahit nung Duterte administration, kailangan ang challenge natin sa international community is to walk the talk.
Yeah. That's true.
Maging maingay at the same, because their statements mean something, but they could also do so many things
Yeah.
para matulak yung mga kinakailangang reforma. Reforma kasi ang kailangan at sila ang nagfo-fund ng maraming reform initiatives, no? So may stake sila. Meron silang, sabi ko nga, may leverage sila, no? Para magkaroon ng mas makabuluhang mga reforma. Hindi naman ganun kanega, Karen, grabe ka naman.
Pero before Rose, before kasi magot Rose, gusto ko lang i-point out na ikukumpara mo sa mga gobyerno ng Pilipinas, itong international community, and when we talk about international community, we're talking about the diplomatic community, the UN, the EU, and international actors na somehow may pakialam din sa human rights. Hindi kasi katulad ng gobyerno na ang paninindigan ng mga yan pagdating sa human rights ay papaling-paling. Mga fixed yung mga mandate nila about human rights. So sa EU, for instance, nakasaad yan sa kanilang mga batas na dapat ganito ang gawin nila sa human rights. At hindi yan nakadepende, well, may degree siguro na magkaiba, pero hindi yan nakadepende kung sino yung leader mo or kung sino yung namumuno. Kasi nakamandato yan. So I think importanteng maintindihan ng mga kababayan natin na kung talagang sisingilin natin ang international community sa mga nangyayari, meron talagang paraan at hindi nila pwedeng ipagkaila yan.
Oo, nag-agree ako. Pero nag-agree din ako kay Tinay na nagplato talaga. And we really appreciated yung international community. Sa panahon ni Duterte, kung wala sila, talagang yari tayong HR community sa Pilipinas sa panahon na yun, di ba? Pero siyempre napakatindi ng consideration ngayon lalo, no, yung geopolitical considerations nitong mga bansa na ito, no, yung brewing tension sa West Philippine Sea, di ba? At sinasamantala siyempre nila yung pagtalikod ng Pilipinas sa China at nasa US na ulit, no? Pero mawiwindang na naman dahil andyan na si Trump, hindi nila alam what will happen next, no? Sa tingin ko, ang priority pa rin ngayon diplomatic at international community, syempre yung sarili nilang welfare, yung sarili nilang agenda. At sasabihin nila, naku, medyo payapa naman ng konti sa Pilipinas eh. At ang ganda ng image ng Pilipinas. Ang ganda ng mga commitments, di ba? Ang commitment ni Remulla sa United Nations, 3 bagay. Yung Special Committee on Human Rights, ginawa nila, di ba? Mm-hmm. Tapos yung Philippine Human Rights Action Plan, nagawa na nila. Ang hinihintay na lang natin yung Forensic Institute. Oo, so yan yung mga commitment at mangyayari yan. Kaya kumbaga, medyo talo tayo doon eh. Di ba? Samantalang alam natin na yung major issue natin, accountability and justice, ay hindi pa nangyayari. Pero ito yung image na napoproject, yan siguro yung challenge natin, no? Sa ating paglalabi pa sa international diplomatic community. Alam din natin na talagang kaya nabuwag o kaya tinapos bigla yung UNGP dahil ayaw na ng Pilipinas na nakikialam ang UN sa ating affairs, no? Kaya yun yung mga pagbabalanse at yun siguro yung ating challenge. How do we sustain, no, yung concern ng diplomatic and international community sa nangyayari pa rin sa atin?
So ko lang linawin, yung UNGP po, ito yung tinatawag na United Nations Joint Program on Human Rights for the Philippines. Ito ay programa ng UN at saka ng gobyerno ng Pilipinas bilang tugon dun sa mga nangyaring human rights abuses nung panahon ni Duterte. So may mga programa sila like improvement of human rights education, investigation, and all of that. Nag-end ito noong July na ang assessment ng maraming civil society organizations ay medyo may na-achieve siya pero hindi na maximize. Kasi nga, ang ginagawa ng gobyerno ng Pilipinas dati ay hinahadlangan pa nga minsan yung mga gawain nito. No? Hindi nagpa-participate dun sa mga nangyayari. At doon na lang sa latter part na lang ng program, ng 3-year program na ito, medyo bumongga ng konti yung participation ng Philippine government. But at the same time, yung panawagan na i-extend ito kasi nga hindi pa tapos, tinutulan ng gobyerno ng Pilipinas. Kaya binuo yung Coordinating Committee on Human Rights na marami ring problema. Karen, your turn.
Well, for me, no, international community, that's correct. No? And if there's one thing that sets this administration apart from the immediate past administration is really decorum, no? Ang lakas talaga ng PR. At sino ba naman ang hindi magugustuhan yon in the international community? On the one hand, yung kabila minuhura ka, di ba? Pero ito sinusuyo ka. Iba rin yon. Kailangan din yon. Siyempre, ng ating liderato na magpakita sila, na makatao sila, magpakita sila na sila'y mahusay kausap at hindi yung hindi manumura o hindi binabastos yung counterparts nila, no. That's one important thing. And perhaps that's the reason why they were taken aback, obviously. And perhaps the interventions or even the statements plateaued, no? Yung attention is plateauing right now kasi it seems like it's okay.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's also about accountability and justice. And we need that. Alam naman natin na tumutulong yung mga allies natin. EU, in particular, and the rest, no? Australia, Canada, US. But again, the politics, world politics will tell you that we're not really as urgent as other areas. Like you have Palestine, you have the issue of Israel, you have Ukraine. And also, in a way, since we're good to go, we're not pivoting towards China, then the US and other allies in the West Philippine Sea issue is kind of, oh good, Philippines is like this. But then Trump came in and that's another perhaps episode. But one last thing I'd like to say is I've always said this, no, from the start, especially during the time of the Fifth Commission, with the Commission on Human Rights, kasama na dinidemonize ng mga human rights community HRDs together with EU, the Pope, etc. We were in good company then, no? Against President Duterte. I've always said that the world is watching.
Yes.
So we need to ensure that we harness that attention, and we must together cooperate so that we can act, so that we can exact accountability and access justice, especially for the ones who are directly victimized by the war on drugs and all that. How can we do that? Through international cooperation, through technical assistance. One of the things perhaps that we can take a look at is to really come together for true drug reform in the country, because that's the greatest problem that we've had over the past 10 years. I should say. And nandun na nakapaloob lahat, disinformation, incitement to killing, etc. Drug reform, I think, is one big thing, again, that we all should cooperate on. And it's genuine reforms that we're looking at in terms of that.
Thank you, Karen. My thoughts on this one is that I would like to echo yung sinabi ni Tina. No? The international community, the diplomatic community should really walk the walk. Because they talk the talk, they should walk the walk. Kailangan nila ng mas maayos, mas maigting pagpapatupad dun sa mga commitment nila on human rights. The European Union, we still have the GSP Plus on its final stages, I think. And then they're going to go into this free trade agreement negotiations with the Philippines,
yes.
FTA. They need to make sure that these negotiations factor in human rights commitments and human rights compliance by the Philippine government. They cannot just say, all is good now because this president doesn't curse us. They really need to do that because pag di nila ginawa yun, mangyayari ulit yung mangyaring ganito. The international community needs to make up for the lost opportunities na nangyari in the past how many years in terms of holding the feet of the government to the fire, making it, accountable. Kasi, like yung panahon ni Duterte, grabe yung patayan, wala, tikom naman ang bibig ng EU eh. Hindi naman sila gumana eh. Yung kanilang GSP Plus, they need to change that. Hindi pwedeng yung GSP Plus na yan or FTA ng kasunod, andyan pa rin yan. Pero at the same time, all of these violations, serious violations of human rights, ay nangyayari at wala silang ginagawa. So, hindi kasi ito tipong paniningil lang ng taong bayan ng mga human rights defenders sa kanila. Kasi hindi may commitment sila eh. May mga pinirmahan silang mga tratado with the Philippine government na ito ang gagawin nila. Now, just because the Philippine government doesn't comply with those things doesn't mean na sila rin ay hindi. Right? So it has to be, they have to be consistent about this. Kasi ang lagi kong binabanggit nga, yung domestic accountability mechanisms natin, medyo mahina. Malami pang kailangan gawin. So we rely on the international community to do their part. Kasi pag wala yung international community na yan, again, kahit nga yung UNJP with all of its faults, maganda na rin na nangyari yan. Di ba? So, pero kailangan pa rin silang, I think, kailangan pa rin silang kalampagin tungkol dito. On that point, I'll give you, each one of you, 1 minute final words kung meron kayong nakalimutan sabihin before we wrap this up. Rose.
Celebration na ng International Human Rights Day. No?
Yes.
Yung tema ng I Defend ay bawat tinig, bawat gawa ay makabuluhan para sa karapatan ng tao. So lahat ng pinag-usapan natin dito na mabibigat, political, no? Pero hindi wag ng political yung simple na lang, no? Na ikaw ay ipinaglalaban mo yung karapatan mo ng pagkain, ng environment, no? Ng edukasyon. Iyan ay tinig, no? At dapat nating ipagpatuloy yung paglalaban. So yan yung gawa. Lahat yan ay magko-contribute din para sa karapatang pantao. So, happy International Human Rights Day sa Tuesday.
Thank you, Rose. Tinay.
Yung international community kasama doon, I think mas mahalaga doon yung international community of peoples. No? Kasi
Yes.
hindi naman gagalaw ang mga gobyerno sa totoo lang kung wala yung taong bayan. So babalik ako doon sa reason for being ng International Human Rights Day. At yon yung at the core of protection at struggle for human rights ay humans, no? At taong bayan yon. So kailangan ma-claim kasi natin yung hindi lang yung karapatan natin, yung kapangyarihan natin, no? Para yung mga gusto nating mga reforma at pagbabago magawa natin. At the end of the day, governments people, sabi nga nila, tyrants can, declare martial law or not, but at the end of the day, tayo ang magtatakda ng kinabukasan natin. Kaya International Human Rights Day is about us, the people, struggling for what is ours. At hindi lang yon karapatan, kinabukasan natin.
Salamat, Tinay. Karen, final words.
Well, thank you very much for having us here. It's the maiden episode pala. I didn't know. And of course, happy International Human Rights Day. Happy International Human Rights Week. It started December 4, National Human Rights Consciousness Week. I'd like to borrow from the UN, of course. Ang theme nila kasi, our rights, our future right now. And it says a lot of things. It unpacks a lot of things because it does not only talk about our children, which represents the future. It's our present. We're called the sandwich generation, maybe. And it also represents the intergeneration. And this is something that we really need to take a look at. The messages that we exchanged earlier is all about how we can do something to make our future better. And there are a lot of events that are happening in our country right now that can really, if we heed the lessons of the Quadcom, if we heed the lessons of the past administration, and heed the lessons of our interrelationships, I think we will certainly have a very bright future ahead of us and a future that really respects human rights in our country. So with that also, it's a happy feast of December 8 kasi ngayon, Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So happy Sunday to all.
Thank you so much, Com Karen. And thank you so much for joining us on this maiden episode, or first episode ng Harapan ng Fox Matters PH. And thank you, Com Karen, former CHR Commissioner. Thank you, Rose Trajano of iDefend, and Tinay Palabay of Karapatan. And I hope we will see you again. And again, happy International Human Rights Day. To everybody. I know there's not a lot to celebrate about human rights in the Philippines, but I think the sense of solidarity that this day will bring to all of us means a lot. So happy HR Day just the same. Salamat po. Ito po Alicia Caliconde, and magandang araw.